Touch me again and I'll end you. She warned the Mafia boss. What he did next shocked everyone. The smell of stale beer and damp pavement was South Raventon's signature perfume. For Maya Rios, it was the smell of exhaustion. At 26, she felt closer to 40. She locked the heavy glass door of the corner cafe, the metallic clack of the deadbolt echoing into the empty street. Another double shift finished, another 16 hours of smiling, pouring coffee, and wiping down counters, all while a different, colder clock ticked in the back of her mind. The numbers were staggering. Piles of them, all printed on flimsy paper with aggressive red lettering, hidden in a shoebox under her bed. Overdue hospital bills from her mother's surgery, the one that was supposed to fix everything and had, instead, taken what little they had left. Maya kept the truth of their financial ruin from her mother, manufacturing a cheerfulness she did not feel, shouldering a burden that was crushing her $1.25 tip at a time. She pulled the collar of her thin jacket tighter. The alley was a shortcut, a bad habit she couldn't break, shaving 3 precious minutes off her walk home tonight. The alley was not empty. A shape detached itself from the shadows of a rusted dumpster. "Maya, Maya, Maya!" His voice oozed, slick with false friendship. Her stomach plummeted. Rico Vale. He was built like a fire hydrant, short, thick, and solid, with a smile that never reached his dead, calculating eyes. He worked for a predatory lender, one who had preyed on her desperation when the hospital's billing department turned hostile. "I don't have it." "Rico," she said, her voice flat. She tried to step around him. He mirrored her movement, blocking the narrow passage. "That's not what we talked about. We talked about tonight." 10 o'clock. "It is." He checked an oversized, gaudy watch. 10:04. "You're late, and you're empty-handed." "I need more time. Next week, after I get my check." "Time's up." He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "My employer, he's not a patient man. He thinks, maybe, you're not taking this seriously." "I am. I just—" Rico shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. Her back slammed into the damp brick wall, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. A flare of white-hot pain shot up her spine. "Hey, maybe you need a reminder of how serious this is," Rico sneered, stepping closer, crowding her space. He raised a hand, his thick fingers curling, and Maya flinched, bracing for the strike. "That's enough, Rico!" The voice was new. It came from the mouth of the alley, low and coated in gravel, possessing an authority that stopped the scene cold. Rico froze, his hand still in the air. He turned, his bravado instantly curdling into something that looked like fear. "Mr. Marcelli." I was just—" A man stepped out of the weak cone of light from the street lamp. He was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace that was more dangerous than Rico's thuggish posturing. This was Luca Marcelli, 31 years old, the newly minted, newly consolidated head of the Marcelli Syndicate. He had just spent 2 hours in a stuffy room at the St. Jude Community Center, listening to neighborhood elders complain about trash pickup and a broken streetlight. It was the part of the job his father had always skipped. The part Luca knew was essential. He had been walking back to his car, loosening his tie, when he'd heard the scuffle. "You were just what?" Luca asked, his voice calm. He didn't look at Rico. His eyes, tired and assessing, were on Maya, who was still pressed against the brick, breathing hard. "You were just handling business?" "Yeah, boss, just business. She's late on her vig." "Get out of here," Luca said. It was not a suggestion. Rico's face flushed. He looked from Luca to Maya, the humiliation warring with his fear, but the hierarchy was absolute. He spat on the ground near Maya's feet. "Next time, I won't be so nice." He scurried past Luca and disappeared onto the main street. The alley was suddenly quiet, save for the distant wail of a siren and Maya's ragged breathing. The man, Luca, turned his full attention to her. He took a half step forward, his hand lifting, perhaps to help her, perhaps to check if she was injured. Maya didn't see a savior. She saw a bigger predator, a man who had just dismissed the jackal with a word. He was part of the same rotten world. The adrenaline that had frozen her now caught fire. She shoved herself off the wall, her entire body shaking with a fury born of fear and exhaustion. He was still moving toward her, his expression unreadable in the gloom. "Touch me again," Maya hissed, the words vibrating from her very core. She squared her shoulders, planting her feet, even though her knees felt like water. Her voice shook, but it was loud. "Touch me again and I'll end you." It was, objectively, a ridiculous threat. She was 5'4", weary to the bone, and facing a man who commanded men like Rico. But she meant it. Luca stopped. His hand, which had been reaching for her, froze in midair. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even respect, passed over his features. He was not used to being threatened, and certainly not by someone who looked like a strong wind could snap her in two. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted both his hands, palms facing her. In the universal gesture of surrender, he took a full step back, giving her the space she had demanded. "All right," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm not going to touch you." The gesture, so opposite to Rico's aggression, wrong-footed her. Her anger faltered, leaving her standing there, trembling, with nowhere for the adrenaline to go. "He's gone," Luca said, nodding toward the street. "But he might circle back. Let me get you home." "No," she snapped, the word too sharp. She clutched her jacket, her knuckles white. "I don't need your help. I don't need anything from you." He studied her for a long moment. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the quiet intelligence in his tired eyes. He looked, she thought, like a man who hadn't slept well in a decade. "I know," he said finally. He gestured out of the alley. "After you." She watched him, suspicious. But the alley was a trap and the street was an escape. She walked past him, giving him a wide berth. Her shoulders tensed, expecting a hand to grab her arm. He didn't move. She emerged onto the lighted street, the sick yellow glow of the lamps feeling like a spotlight. She started walking, fast, her worn sneakers pounding the pavement. She didn't look back, but she could feel him. She could hear the distinct, measured footfalls of expensive leather shoes on the concrete, keeping a steady, respectful distance. He wasn't crowding her, but he wasn't leaving. She walked the 6 blocks to her apartment building, her spine rigid, every nerve ending screaming with awareness. He was a shadow, a silent guardian she hadn't asked for. When she reached the cracked steps of her building, she fumbled for her keys, her hands still shaking. She risked a glance over her shoulder. He was half a block back, standing under the broken streetlight he'd heard about earlier, a tall silhouette in a perfectly tailored suit. He watched until she was inside the lobby, until the heavy door clicked shut behind her. Only then did the silhouette turn and walk away. The next morning, she was 20 minutes early for her shift, her body sore from the shove, and she saw it, a black sedan, a Lincoln, parked across the street from the cafe. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It sat there, unmoving, a silent, menacing statement. Maya bristled. This was not protection. This was surveillance. This was a message. She belonged to him now, whether she liked it or not. This was how his kind operated. They saved you in an alley and then owned you on the street. She spent the entire morning shift fuming, her movements sharp, her smiles for customers brittle. The car never moved. A man in a dark suit sat in the driver's seat, never getting out. He was a deterrent. A piece on Luca Marcelli's chessboard, placed there to keep Rico Vale at bay. To Maya, it felt like a cage. The lunch rush was a blur of sandwiches and steaming cups. At 2:30, during the afternoon lull, the bell over the cafe door chimed. Luca Marcelli walked in the harsh fluorescent light of the cafe. He looked different, younger but also more worn down. His dark hair was perfect, his suit was immaculate, but the shadows under his eyes were deep, and his hands, as he stood by the window, pretending to study the menu. She saw his hands. His knuckles were scarred, the skin pulled tight over the bone, a stark contrast to the expensive wool of his suit. This was not a man who only sat in meetings. He turned and walked to the counter. The few other patrons in the cafe didn't seem to recognize him. He was just another handsome, well-dressed man. Black coffee, he said. His voice was just as she remembered, low and quiet. She poured it, her hand steady. She slid the cup onto the counter, careful not to let their fingers touch. He paid with a $20 bill, his eyes staying on her face. "Keep the change," he said. He didn't move. He just stood there, by the window, sipping his coffee, watching the street, watching the sedan. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was hovering. He was in her space, her place of work, marking his territory. "You can stop," she said, her voice low and sharp. He looked at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Stop what?" "Hovering, sending your car, staring, whatever this is. I don't want it." He took another sip of coffee, his gaze thoughtful. "He won't come back while my car is there. And what happens when your car leaves? He comes back. And I'm the girl who's under Marcelli's protection? You've put a target on my back. You've made it worse." He set the cup down. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, heavy stock business card. It was simple. His name. A single phone number. No title. He didn't need one. He slid it across the counter. "If he bothers you again, call." Maya looked at the card. It felt like a trap, a contract. She looked back up at his face, at his tired, watchful eyes. She felt it then. A strange, unwelcome tug. A pull, deep in her stomach, that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the quiet, controlled power he radiated. He wasn't frantic, like Rico. He was calm. He was the eye of the storm. With 2 fingers, her chin held high, she slid the card back across the counter. "I told you," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "I don't need your help." His eyes held hers. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He nodded once, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. He left the card where it was, abandoned between them. A truce line neither would cross. He finished his coffee in silence and left. The card sat on the counter for the rest of her shift, a small, white rectangle of temptation and danger. Just before closing, she swept it into the trash. That night, she refused the shortcut. She walked the long way home, under the streetlights, her keys clutched between her knuckles. It didn't matter. He was there, waiting near her building, leaning against a graffiti-covered wall, the smirk back on his face. "The big boss's car is gone, Principessa," Rico taunted, pushing off the wall. "Guess you're not so special after all." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She was exposed. The street was empty. She opened her mouth to scream, but before the sound could come out, a beam of light flooded the sidewalk. A neighborhood patrol car, its siren off, cruised slowly around the corner. It stopped, its spotlight pinning Rico against the wall like a trapped insect. Rico threw his hands up. "I'm just talking." The officer inside the car just stared at him. The message was clear. After a tense 10 seconds, Rico spat on the ground, the same gesture of defeated malice, and scurried off into the darkness, this time for good. The patrol car lingered for another minute, then slowly continued on its way. Maya ran the last few feet to her building, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. Safe in her tiny, one-room apartment, she leaned against the door, her heart racing. It wasn't a coincidence. The sedan, the coffee, the patrol car. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign. He hadn't just put a guard on her, he had tipped the local precinct. He was using a scalpel, not a hammer. She grabbed her phone and texted her friend, "Sarah, crazy day. A loan shark backed me into an alley." Sarah's reply was instant. "OMG, are you okay? Did you call the cops?" Maya stared at the screen. How could she explain? She typed, deleted, and typed again. "I'm fine. Someone stopped him. A guy." Then tonight the shark showed up again and a cop car magically appeared. A guy, like a hot guy? Maya thought of the expensive suit, the scarred knuckles, the tired eyes. I don't know. He's complicated. He's like a strange, gentle mobster. It's terrifying. Gentle mobster? Maya, stay away from him. That's trouble. I know, she typed. But she didn't send it. She shut her phone off. She was half angry, furious at his high-handed interference, and she was half relieved. A deep, shuddering relief that left her knees weak. She could still smell the faint, clean scent of his suit, a mix of expensive soap and wool. She touched her chest, feeling the strange, unfamiliar heat that had settled there, and she hated him for it. Miles away, in an office high above the city. Luca Marcelli stood in the dark, looking out at the map of territories that was Raventon. His jacket was off, his tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His aide, an older, sharp man named Bianchi, placed a thin folder on the polished mahogany desk. "You were right, boss. The girl, Maya Rios, her mother's medical debt, it was sold off by the hospital, went through 2 collection agencies before it landed with Vale's outfit. The interest rate is criminal." Luca picked up the papers. He scanned the numbers, the predatory fees, the impossible total. He saw her name, her address. He saw the name of the hospital that had failed her mother and then sold her into debt. He closed the folder, his knuckles white. "This city," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "It eats the good ones." Bianchi waited. Rico Vale is old guard, protected by some of his father's capos. Making a move on him over a civilian, it will be seen as weakness. Luca stared at the folder. He thought of her in the alley. Terrified and defiant, he thought of her in the cafe, proud and angry. "Touch me again and I'll end you." She had spirit. The city hadn't broken her yet. "It's not weakness to cut out a cancer," Luca said. "Predatory lending, the old guard rackets, they corrode us. They corrode the city. They make us no better than him." He tapped the folder. "What do you want to do?" Luca looked out the window again. He could see the lights of South Raventon from here. He thought about the business card she had pushed back at him. She didn't want a handout. She didn't want to be owned. "She's not syndicate business," Luca said, as much to himself as to Bianchi. "I'm not putting her on the books, but I'm not letting Vale or this debt break her." He had to find a different way, a way to intervene without possessing her, a way to protect her that left her free. It was a contradiction, a needle he had to thread, and he wasn't sure it was possible. But as he looked at her name on that paper, he knew, with an unsettling certainty, that he was going to try. The orange slick paper was taped to her apartment door, flapping in the drafty hallway like a dying bird, a 30-day notice, not a warning, but a final judgment. Maya read the legal jargon, her vision blurring. 30 days to pay 3 months back rent or be forcibly removed by the sheriff's department. She ran down the stairs and caught the landlord, Mr. Petrov, as he was getting into his rusting sedan. "Mr. Petrov, please," she begged, her voice sounding thin and desperate even to her own ears. "I just need a little more time. My check comes next Friday. I can pay for this month, and we can work out a plan for the rest." Petrov, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a grimace of digestive discomfort, barely looked at her. He adjusted his stained tie. "Plan? No plan. You're late. You're always late. 30 days. Miss Rios, that's the plan. But I've been a good tenant for 3 years. The water heater was broken all last winter. You don't like it, you can leave." He brushed her off, a physical gesture of dismissal, and folded his large frame into the car. He drove away, leaving her on the curb, the orange paper crumpled in her fist. Across the street, in a nondescript gray car, 2 of Rico Vale's men sat. The one in the passenger seat held up a smartphone, coolly recording her shoulders slumping, her hand rising to cover her face as a single, hot tear of pure rage and frustration escaped. They were leveraging her stress, documenting her collapse. The footage was for Rico, a tool to show her just how many ways she was trapped, miles away, in an office that smelled of old leather and new money. Luca Marcelli was also being warned. Bianchi, his consigliere, a man who had served his father for 20 years, stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "The captains are restless. Luca," Bianchi said, his voice a dry rustle. "They say your father would have let Rico Vale handle his business, that he would have skinned the girl for the disrespect she showed you, not protected her." Luca leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the cityscape. "My father's way of doing business is what led to a bullet in his chest. His captains are dinosaurs. Bianchi. They're fat on these predatory rackets. It's our business, Bianchi countered, his voice remaining respectful, but firm. Profit is profit. What you are doing, protecting a civilian, a barista, it looks like a weakness. It looks like you're being led by something other than your head. Luca's chair snapped forward, his palms hitting the desk with a quiet, solid thud. And what corrodes us, Bianchi? What gives the feds the leverage they need every single time? It's the loan sharking that bleeds a neighborhood dry, the old guard lining their pockets by ruining women like her. He tapped the folder with Maya's information, which had not left his desk. This isn't business, it's a sickness. It eats our legitimacy from the inside out. We are supposed to be protectors of this community, not the wolves that pick them apart. I am ending it, starting with Vale. He will see it as an insult, Bianchi warned. Then let him be insulted. Luca stood. He's about to be much more than that. Maya felt the eyes on her all day. The cafe was her only sanctuary, but now it felt like a fishbowl. She saw the gray sedan parked a block away. She saw neighborhood locals looking at her, then whispering. The word was out. She was someone's property. She was in the back hallway, dragging a heavy bag of trash toward the exit. When a hand clamped down on her wrist, she didn't even need to look. The smell of cheap cologne and stale cigars hit her first. Rico Vale. You think you're smart, he hissed, his face inches from hers. The hallway was narrow, lined with metal shelving, and he had her pinned. His fingers dug into her wrist, right on the bone. You think your new boyfriend can protect you forever? Get off of me, Maya spat. Trying to twist her arm free, the bag of trash dropped, spilling coffee grounds onto the floor. He made me look like a fool, Rico growled, his grip tightening. She could feel her bones grinding. A sharp, bright pain shot up her arm. And you know what happens to me. Happens to you. You're going to pay her debt, and you're going to pay mine. His other hand came up, grabbing a fistful of her apron, yanking her closer, a primal surge of defiance, hotter than her fear, ripped through her. She was not a victim in an alley. Not again. She yanked free, a violent, twisting motion that surprised him. As his grip loosened, she slapped his hand away. Not his face. His hand, a sharp, stinging crack that echoed in the tiny space. It was a rejection of his very touch. Don't you ever put your hands on me again, she seethed, her eyes blazing. Rico's face went purple with rage. He raised his hand, open-palmed, to strike her. Apologize to her. The voice was arctic. It cut through Rico's fury like a razor. Luca Marcelli stood at the end of the hallway, a dark silhouette against the bright light of the kitchen. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Rico froze, his hands still in the air. He looked from Luca to Maya and back, his bravado crumbling into pure, sickening terror. He had been caught, in the act, by the one man he could not cross. Mr. Marcelli, Rico stammered. Boss, she's disrespecting me. You have 3 seconds, Rico, Luca said, taking one slow step into the hallway. He was not looking at Rico's face. He was looking at the hand that had been raised to Maya. 1. You apologize for your behavior. 2. You tell her the debt is gone. 3. You get out of my sight, or I cut you out of every piece of syndicate business, from the docks to the heights. You will have nothing left. You will be nothing. Rico's seething was a physical thing. Maya could see the muscles in his thick neck trembling. This was a man being completely and totally unmade. He turned to Maya. The word sorry seemed to physically choke him. I'm sorry, he spat, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. The debt. It's gone. Wiped. Now go, Luca said. Rico Vale scrambled past him, shoving a stack of boxes out of his way, and disappeared. The silence that fell in the hallway was heavier than the confrontation had been. There was only the sound of Maya's ragged breathing and the drip of a leaky faucet. Luca turned to her. His face was still hard, the anger from his encounter with Rico still thrumming around him. He took a step, and she flinched, an involuntary recoil. He stopped instantly, the anger in his expression vanishing, replaced by that same tired look she'd seen before. He held his hands up, just as he had in the alley, showing her he was unarmed, that he was not a threat. He didn't touch her. He didn't move closer. He just watched her. His gaze locked on her face until her breathing started to slow. "What do you need right now?" he asked, his voice low. The question stunned her. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "He won't bother you again." But, "What do you need?" He was giving the power back to her. She looked at the spilled trash, the coffee grounds, the shelves of cleaning supplies. She felt the painful throb in her wrist where his fingers had been. She felt the humiliating sting of tears, not of fear, but of sheer exhaustion, pressing at the back of her eyes. "To breathe," she whispered. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, hugging herself tight, holding herself together. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, her shoulders dropped. She had held her breath, and now she let it out in a long, shuddering sigh. He nodded. "Once. The back door," he said. He led her through the back door and into the alley, the same one where this had all started. It was raining now, a cold, miserable drizzle that tapped against the metal dumpsters. He shrugged out of his heavy wool coat, the one that cost a fortune, and without a word, draped it over her shoulders. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw it back at him, but it was warm, and it smelled of him, that clean, expensive, masculine scent that was so at odds with the stench of the alley. The weight of it was a comfort, a physical shield. They stood there, inches apart, the rain misting around them. Steam rose from their breath in the cold air. He didn't close the gap. He didn't try to touch her, to comfort her in the way other men might. He just stood, a silent, solid presence, and let her breathe. His gaze was fixed on her face, steady and intense, as if he were trying to memorize it. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a palpable force in the cold. Her breathing steadied, but her cheeks flushed, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coat. This quiet, controlled intimacy was more potent, more unsettling than any aggressive touch. "I'm arranging a lawyer for you," he said, his voice quiet. "A pro bono attorney. She's the best. She'll handle the eviction notice. And she'll look at the original loan from Vale. She's legitimate. No ties to me." Maya stiffened, pulling the coat tighter. "I'm not a charity case. Mr. Marcelli?" "I know," he said. "This isn't charity. This is a weapon. Your landlord is breaking 3 housing codes. That loan agreement is predatory and illegal. This is about you fighting back, with the right tools. I'm just providing them." She looked up at him, into his tired, serious eyes. He was offering her a way out that wasn't his way. He was offering her autonomy. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll meet with her. But I'm in charge. I make the decisions. Not you. Not the lawyer. Me." A small, slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face. "That's what I'm counting on." The news spread through Raventon's underworld like a lit fuse. Luca Martelli, the new boss, had personally stepped in for a civilian. He had castrated Rico Vale, a maidman over a barista. In a dimly lit bar by the shipyards, the leader of the North Pier crew, Vex Moreno, heard the story. He saw it not as a love story, but as a tactical opening. The Marcelli boss had a weakness, a pressure point, and Vex, who was looking for any way to force a turf concession, decided it was time to see how much pressure that point could take. At the cafe, Maya's co-worker, Sarah, pulled her into the dry storage room. "Maya, you have to be careful," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear and a little bit of excitement. "My cousin knows a guy who knows one of Vex's crew. They're talking about you. They're calling you the boss's girl." "I am not his girl," Maya hissed, her anger flaring. "I never asked for any of this. He just showed up." "It doesn't matter what you asked for," Sarah said. "It matters what it looks like. You're being seen with him. He's putting his coat on you. Men like that don't do that for free. You're in danger." Maya slammed a stack of cups onto a shelf. "I can handle myself." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie, and she admitted, in the most secret, terrified part of her heart, that a small piece of her had been watching the door all day, dreading and half hoping. He would walk in for another black coffee. He called her that evening. His number was blocked. His voice was just as she remembered. "Meet me. The river walk. By the old ferry landing. I need to talk to you." She went. It was a reckless, stupid decision, but she went. He was there, leaning against the railing, watching the dark, polluted water slide by. He wasn't in a suit. He wore dark jeans, boots, and a heavy jacket. He looked, for a moment, like a normal man. "This is getting complicated," he said, without preamble, as she stopped a few feet away from him. "You mean your rivals think I'm your weakness?" she said, crossing her arms. "I know. My friend told me." He turned to look at her, impressed. "You don't hide, do you? I'm tired of hiding." "This is my life, Mr. Marcelli, and it was just fine until you and your goons decided to make it your playground." "It wasn't fine," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You were being hunted, and I'm trying to keep you safe. And I'm trying to keep my life intact," she shot back. "There's a difference. What you call safe, I call a cage. Your car outside my work, your men watching me. Now, your enemies. This is not my world. I know." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I'm trying to help without strings, but men like Vex, they only see one thing, possession." They stood in silence, the ache to touch, to close the gap, a living thing between them. It was a cold night, but she felt warm. "So, what do we do?" she asked. Finally. "We set boundaries," he said. "You live your life. You let the lawyer do her work, and I will keep my distance. But my protection will be there, whether you see it or not." "Help without strings," she repeated, testing the words. It sounded impossible. "Help without strings," he agreed. The bus ride home was quiet. Maya's mind was spinning. As the bus pulled to her stop, she saw it. A black SUV, parked, its lights off. Not the Lincoln. This one felt different, ominous. She stayed on the bus. "Last stop, miss," the driver called out. She got off, her heart pounding. The SUV's engine turned on. It pulled out, slowly, following her as she walked. She was fumbling for her phone, her hands shaking, when a car horn, long and loud, blared from the cross street. Luca's Lincoln, it shot out of the side street and cut the SUV off, blocking it. The Lincoln was perpendicular to the curb, a solid black wall. The driver's window lowered, and even from half a block away, Maya could see Luca's driver, a big man with a shaved head, just staring at the SUV. It was a silent, vehicular standoff, a message. The SUV's reverse lights flashed. It backed up, made a sharp U-turn, and sped off. The Lincoln sat there for a long moment. Then, it simply drove away, continuing its patrol. Maya made it to her apartment, her legs shaking. She locked the door, bolted it, and leaned against it. She pulled out her phone. She still had his number from the business card, even though she'd thrown the card away. She had memorized it. She typed 2 words, "Thank you." She hit send. Almost instantly, the 3 small dots appeared. He was typing. She watched them, her breath held, her heart hammering. What would he say? That it was nothing, that he'd always be there? She couldn't want more. She couldn't let herself fall into this. Before he could finish his reply, she locked her phone and threw it on the couch, her hand trembling. She was stopping herself before she fell over the edge. But as she stood in her small, dark apartment, she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was already in midair. The lawyer's name was Anne Cushing, and she was a shark, but the legal kind. She met Maya in a coffee shop 2 towns over, a place with no connection to Raventon. Anne was all sharp angles and sharper intellect, and she spoke in a rapid-fire cadence that Maya had to strain to follow. "The eviction is stayed," Anne said, sliding a file across the table. "I filed an injunction. Your landlord, Petrov, has been cited for 7 unaddressed housing code violations. He's backpedaling so fast he might fall over." It was the first piece of good news Maya had received in a year. "So I can stay?" "Temporarily, yes. But that's the small fish. Maya, the big one is the debt." Anne leaned in, her voice dropping. "Your loan didn't just land with Rico Vale. It was sold, and sold again. It passed through 3 separate shell companies. all registered in Delaware, all with the same mailing address, a P.O. box in South Raventon. "I don't understand," Maya said. "It's a washing machine," Anne explained, tapping her pen on the file. "They're laundering the debt, inflating the principal with illegal fees at every step, making it impossible to trace. But I found a name on one of the incorporation papers, an ex-Marcelli enforcer named Tommy the Fist Falcone." Maya felt a chill. Marcelli. "An old-timer. My investigator says he's part of the old guard, the ones Luca Marcelli is supposedly trying to sideline. But here's the kicker." She flipped a page. "Guess who co-signed the lease on that P.O. box? A currently serving precinct lieutenant, Calhan." Maya's blood ran cold. A cop. This wasn't just a loan shark. It was a network, a pipeline designed to bleed people like her dry, and it was protected by the law. What does this mean? "It means your debt is the tip of a very large, very dirty iceberg," Anne said, her eyes hard. "It means we can fight this. It means we might even be able to get it all dismissed. But it also means this just got a lot more dangerous." While Maya was processing this new, terrifying reality, Luca Marcelli was standing in a cold, cavernous warehouse on the industrial side of the river. The air smelled of rust and diesel. Before him stood 6 men, all in their 50s and 60s, his father's men. Tommy Falcone was among them. "You wanted to see us, boss?" Tommy asked, his arms crossed over a barrel chest. His tone was just this side of insubordination. "I'm looking at the books," Luca said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the vast space. "And I'm seeing a lot of profit from side rackets I don't remember authorizing." The men shifted. A few of them exchanged glances. "Business is business, Luca." Another man, Sal, muttered. "Your father understood that. Profit is profit." "My father is dead," Luca replied, his voice dropping a degree, becoming colder. "And this city is changing. This predatory lending, it's over." A low murmur of dissent rippled through the men. "This is our business," Tommy Falcone said, stepping forward. "We built this. We've been running these routes for 20 years. You come in, a kid still wet behind the ears, and start telling us how to earn. Over what? Some girl? A woman's tears shouldn't cost us money. Luca." It was a direct challenge. The warehouse went utterly silent. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaking corrugated roof. Luca walked slowly to a heavy steel table in the center of the room. He was holding a thick, leather-bound ledger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw a weapon. He just dropped the book. The slam of the ledger hitting the steel table was as loud as a gunshot. It echoed, sharp and final. The men flinched. "A woman's tears?" Luca said, his voice a controlled, fierce whisper. He opened the ledger. "How about Maria Gonzalez, a 60-year-old widow? You put her on the street for a $5,000 medical bill. How about the Nguyen family? You took their corner store. This isn't profit. This is rot." His finger jabbed at a line in the book. "And this is the end of it. As of today, all predatory contracts are void. You will pay fines from your own pockets to this syndicate, and you will personally fund a restitution pool for every victim we can find. Starting with Maya Rios, you will undo the damage." "You can't be serious," Sal stammered. That's millions." "It's the new cost of business," Luca said, his eyes drilling into Tommy Falcone. "You undercut the city. You undercut me. You make us the enemy of the people we live with. I am building something that lasts, not a grubby racket that preys on widows. You're either with me or you're out. And if you're out, Tommy, you leave with nothing. Am I clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the warehouse, the heavy door groaning shut behind him, leaving his father's men to stare at the open ledger, their faces pale with fury and a new, unsettling fear. The reprisal was not immediate. It was, however, inevitable. 2 days later, Maya arrived at the cafe for her morning shift and screamed. The large plate glass window, the one that said Raventon Corner Cafe in cheerful gold leaf, was a spider web of shattered glass. A large rock sat on the floor inside, surrounded by shards. but it was the paint that made her stomach turn. Sprayed across the brick in crude, dripping red letters was a single word: whore. Maya's hands flew to her mouth, a sob of pure violation catching in her throat. Her boss, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, was on the phone with the police, his voice high and thin. "It's the North Pier crew," the officer who responded said, kicking at the rock with his boot. "Vex Moreno's signature. He's sending a message. To who? I wonder." He looked at Maya, his eyes lingering, full of suspicion and a kind of cheap pity. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the broom Mr. Henderson gave her. She was sweeping the glass, her back to the street, when the bell over the door chimed. She didn't look up, just swept, tears of rage blurring her vision. "Maya!" She froze. She looked up. Through her tear-streaked vision, Luca Marcelli was standing in the ruined doorway. He was in a suit, as always, but he looked like he had come straight from his car, and he was not alone. Across the street, in the same spot his driver always parked, was a news van, and a man with a phone, filming onlookers, drawn by the police car, were watching, whispering. This was a performance. Vex had set the stage, and Luca had just walked onto it. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at the word on the wall. His face, which had been tight with a controlled anger, went utterly blank. It was a terrifying, cold stillness. Then he looked at her, at the broom in her hands. He undid the button on his suit jacket. He shrugged it off, folding the $1,000 garment neatly and placing it on a clean chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his crisp, white shirt, revealing his scarred knuckles and the strong, corded muscles of his forearms. He walked past her, took the dustpan from a stunned Mr. Henderson, and crouched down. "You sweep. I'll hold the pan," he said, his voice quiet, as if they were the only two people in the world. And so, as the cameras rolled and the neighborhood watched, the head of the Marcelli syndicate helped his barista sweep up broken glass. He didn't speak. He didn't posture. He just worked, his movements economical and precise, a silent, damning statement. He was not ashamed to be here. He was not hiding. He was claiming his territory, and he was claiming her, but in a way that defied every Mafia stereotype. He was helping. They worked in silence for 10 minutes until the glass was gone. Mr. Henderson, having regained some composure, was boarding up the window with plywood. The police had left. The news van remained. "There's a piece," Luca said, his voice low, "on your hand." Maya looked. A tiny, silver shard of glass was embedded in her palm, a small, bright red bead of blood welling up around it. She hadn't even felt it. He guided her into the back room, to the small, metal sink. He was gentle, but his touch was electric. He turned on the tap, his large hand brushing hers as he guided her palm under the cool water. "There's a first aid kit on the shelf," she whispered, her voice sounding strange. He found it. He sat her down on a stool, the only one in the cramped room, and knelt before her. He was on one knee, like a knight, and the absurdity of the thought almost made her laugh. He opened the kit, his movements surprisingly careful for a man with such scarred hands. He took out an antiseptic wipe and a small bandage. "This might sting," he said. He held her hand, his thumb rested on her pulse point, and she could feel the rough warmth of his skin. He looked at her, his dark eyes asking a question. His gaze was so intense, so focused, it felt more intimate than a kiss. He was asking permission. Her breath hitched. She could feel the rapid, frantic beat of her heart against her ribs. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He carefully, gently, plucked the shard of glass from her palm. She winced. He cleaned the tiny wound with the wipe, his touch careful, his eyes never leaving hers. The world seemed to drop away. There was no cafe, no Vex, no debt. There was only this small, cramped room, the smell of antiseptic, and the heat of his hand holding hers. He wrapped the bandage around her palm, his fingers brushing her skin. When he was done, he didn't let go. He just held her hand for a moment longer, slowly, as if in a trance. She reached out with her other hand, the uninjured one. She didn't know what she was doing. She just felt the need to touch. She rested her hand on his shoulder. She could feel the hard muscle beneath his shirt. He closed his eyes. He leaned in, slowly, and rested his forehead against hers. They stayed like that, unmoving. His breath was warm on her cheek. She could feel a shiver, a deep, cellular tremor, run through her. They hadn't kissed. They hadn't even truly embraced. But in that moment, with their foreheads resting together, his hand holding hers, they had crossed a line. This was something fragile. This was something real. And it was terrifying. The stalemate, however, was not just on the street. It was with the law. 2 days later, a black and white pulled up as Luca was leaving a meeting. Lieutenant Calhan got out of the passenger side. "Mr. Marcelli," Calhan said, his voice a gravelly, official bark. He was a thick man, his uniform straining over a gut. "A word." They stood on the sidewalk, a picture of civic cooperation. "Heard about that mess at the cafe?" Calhan said, not looking at him. "A shame. Things are getting heated. Vex Moreno is a problem." "He is," Luca agreed, his voice neutral. "Maybe he's a problem because he's being provoked," Calhan suggested. "You start meddling in business that isn't yours. You start stepping on toes. Things get messy. I'd hate to have to start raiding your fronts, Mr. Marcelli. I hear your shipping compliance isn't quite up to code." It was a direct threat. Luca smiled, a thin, cold expression. "And I hear your brother's investment firm just had a very good quarter. Lieutenant, amazing returns, almost miraculous, especially given the influx of new capital from all those little shell companies. It would be a shame if that paper trail, the one my lawyers are currently untangling, found its way to the Internal Revenue Service. I hear they're much scarier than I am." Calhan's face went pale, then a blotchy, angry red. The stalemate crackled between them, thick and dangerous. "You keep your nose out of my precinct," Calhan snarled, his official mask dropping. "And you keep your hands out of my city's pockets," Luca replied, his voice still quiet. He got in his car and left Calhan fuming on the curb. Maya felt like she was living in a different, more dangerous version of her own life. She tried to find normal. A few days later, she took a small bouquet of cheap carnations to the cemetery, to the small, quiet bench that served as her mother's memorial. She sat on the cold stone, the wind whipping her hair. "I'm in so much trouble, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I met this man. He's not a good man. I know he's not. He's dangerous. But he protected me. And I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. I'm scared of the men who are after me, and I think I'm even more scared that I'm starting to need him." She sat there until the sun started to dip, her confession hanging in the cold air. When she stood up, she saw him. Luca. He was standing a respectful distance away, by the iron fence, his hands in the pockets of his jacket. He hadn't interrupted. He hadn't approached. He had simply waited. She walked toward him, her heart a heavy, aching weight. "Were you listening?" "No," he said. "I was waiting to make sure you were safe." He walked her home, side by side. They didn't talk about the debt, or Vex, or Calhan. They talked about the weather. They talked about a dog that ran by. It was so normal it was surreal. As they walked, their hands brushed, once, twice, a small, accidental contact that felt like a jolt of electricity, but he didn't lace his fingers with hers. He respected the boundary. The next day, the online rumor exploded. The video of Luca helping her clean the cafe had gone viral in Raventon. A local gossip blog had posted it with the headline, "Marcelli's new mall? Watch Raventon's kingpin clean up for his kept woman." The comments were brutal. She was a gold digger, a homewrecker, a whore. When she walked into the cafe, Mr. Henderson pulled her aside, his face sweaty with anxiety. "Maya, I'm sorry, people are, well, they're nervous. My insurance is sky high, my wife. She doesn't want any trouble. Maybe you should take some time off, just until things cool down." She was being fired, punished for surviving, punished for being vandalized. "Until when? Mr. Henderson?" she asked. her voice flat. He couldn't meet her eyes. She took off her apron and left. She was 2 blocks away when her phone rang. It was him. "He fired you," he said. It wasn't a question. "He suggested I take time off," she said, her voice hollow. "I have a community foundation," he said, all business. "The one I was at the night we met, it's legitimate. We run coat drives, a food pantry, job training. I need a new security coordinator for the main office, someone to monitor the cameras, check people in, liaise with the neighborhood watch. It pays well. Clear hours. It's a real job." "No," she said instantly. "I am not your charity case. I am not your kept woman. I will not work for you. It blurs the lines." "I know," he said, and she could hear the frustration in his voice. "But you're not safe. Maya, Vex is still out there. Calhan is watching you. Being out on the street looking for work, that makes you a target. I'll take my chances," she snapped and hung up. She spent the next day printing resumes and walking into stores. Every single one of them recognized her from the video. She got a lot of nervous apologies. No one was hiring. She returned to her apartment, defeated, to find a new notice on her door. Not from her landlord. It was her old work schedule. From the cafe. The one she'd had before she was let go. It was taped to her door, with a red circle around her old closing shift. 10 o'clock. It was a message from Vex or Calhan or maybe Rico. It didn't matter. They were telling her they knew her routine. They were telling her she was still theirs to play with. Her blood ran ice cold. She tore the paper from the door, her hands shaking. This was not protection. This was a threat. She called him. "I'll take the job," she said, her voice hard. There was a silence on the other end. "Okay," he said, "but on my terms," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I want clear pay, on a real payroll. I want clear hours. I want a contract. I am an employee, Mr. Marcelli. Nothing else, no favors, no blurred lines. This is a job, that's all." She heard him exhale, a sound that might have been a laugh or just relief. "Agreement, not ownership," he said, his voice soft. "I told you. Maya, that's what I'm counting on." He smiled. She couldn't see it, but she could hear it in his voice. And for the first time, she smiled, too. It was a small, grim smile, but it was a start. She was taking back control. The Marcelli Community Foundation was not what Maya had expected. It was not a sterile office or a front for laundering money. It was loud, chaotic, and smelled of donated wool and industrial-strength coffee, located in a converted warehouse in a part of town that was slowly trying to heal. It was a hub of constant, frantic activity. Her job, technically, was security and intake coordinator. She sat at a desk by the front door, her back to a wall of monitors. She signed people in for the food pantry, buzzed in deliveries, and kept an eye on the street. It was a job, with a contract and a paycheck that cleared, but the winter coat drive was in full swing, and it was all hands on deck. Maya found herself spending more time in the back, sorting through massive bags of donated clothes, than at her desk. It was here, in this space, that she saw Luca. He was not just a name on the letterhead, he was a constant presence. He was not the man who had terrified Rico Vale or stared down a corrupt police lieutenant. Here, he was just Luca. She watched him from behind a mountain of children's snowsuits. She saw him listen with surprising, unfeigned patience as a neighborhood elder, a woman in her 80s named Mrs. DeMarco, complained for a full 10 minutes about the quality of the donated bread. He didn't dismiss her. He nodded, asked questions, and then personally walked her to the pantry manager to find a different, softer loaf. She saw him with the reformed ex-cons, the men who worked the loading docks, a younger, volatile man, new to the program, had started shouting at a manager. Luca had materialized, not with threats, but with a hand on the man's shoulder, pulling him aside. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she saw Luca's body language. He wasn't crowding the man, he was standing with him, his voice low and steady until the man's shoulders dropped, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a sullen, exhausted nod. He navigated the donors, rich, pearl-wearing women from the Heights, with that same quiet, unsettling patience. He accepted their checks with a reserved smile. his eyes revealing nothing. A perfect mask of gratitude. He was a chameleon, a man of a dozen different faces, and the one he showed here, the one who was patient and respectful and kind, that one terrified her more than the mob boss ever had, because that was the one she couldn't bring herself to hate. They fell into a new, unspoken rhythm. Their days were professional. She was Miss Rios. He was Mr. Marcelli. But the nights were different. The coat drive was behind schedule. They were often the last two in the building, long after the volunteers had gone home, sorting and boxing inventory under the harsh fluorescent lights. They were working late, surrounded by cardboard boxes. It was almost 11 at night. The foundation was silent except for the thud of a box, the squeak of packing tape. "I didn't think you'd be here this late," she said, her voice echoing in the vast room. "Neither did I," he said. He was taping up a box labeled Men's Large. "I hate inventory. I used to do this at the cafe, at least here. I don't go home smelling like burnt coffee," and he stopped, a small smile touching his lips. "What did you smell like?" "Like desperation and cinnamon," she said, and was surprised to hear herself laugh. It was a real, rusty laugh, a sound she hadn't heard in months. The sound hung in the air between them. He softened. The exhaustion, the weight of his world, seemed to lift from his shoulders for a second. He just watched her, his eyes warm. "My mother," Maya said, her voice suddenly quiet. She used to say you could fix anything with a good coat of paint and a clean pot. She loved this kind of work, organizing, making order out of chaos. "She sounds like a good woman," he said, his voice low. She deserved better than this city, than what happened." "Yes," he said, and the word was heavy. She did. They stood in the quiet, the unspoken truths of their city, of the debt, of the violence, filling the space between them. She finished taping a box, her hands moving automatically. He was standing next to her, by the shelving unit. She reached for another empty box, and her hand brushed his. No, not even his hand. His knuckles, the scarred, rough knuckles, grazed the side of the cardboard box, just an inch from where her own hand rested. The air crackled. It was a near miss, a moment of pure, accidental static. She didn't pull away. He didn't move. Slowly, she lifted her head. He was already looking at her. His gaze was intense, stripped of all pretense. It was just him, just Luca, and he was not a boss, not a savior. He was just a man, tired and lonely, looking at a woman he wanted. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe she did. She leaned in, just a fraction, and he met her. He didn't grab her. He didn't take... His hand, the one that had been on the box, came up, but he didn't touch her face. He cupped her jaw, his thumb resting lightly on her cheekbone, a gesture of profound, heartbreaking gentleness. It was a question. She closed her eyes. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft. It was a slow, careful kiss. It was hesitant. Then it was sure. It was a kiss of shared exhaustion, of mutual survival. His other hand rested on the shelving unit, caging her in, but not touching her. Her own hands, she realized, were clutching the front of her work shirt. Her knuckles white. The world dropped away. There was no foundation, no debt, no Vex Moreno. There was only the scent of him, clean and masculine, and the startling warmth of his mouth, and the shiver that ran down her spine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of recognition. "Oh," she thought, her mind going blissfully blank. "There you are." He pulled back, slowly. His forehead rested against hers, just as it had in the cafe. But this time, it was different. This time, they had both fallen. "Maya," he whispered, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered back. "Don't say it." While they were sealing a box with a kiss, the forces they were trying to ignore were coalescing. In a grimy sports bar near the docks, Vex Moreno was losing patience. His vandalism at the cafe had been cleaned up. His rumors had been ignored. And Luca Marcelli had refused to take the bait. "He's laughing at us," Vex snarled, slamming his beer bottle on the table. "He's washing glass and rolling up sleeves like he's a damn politician. He's not a boss. He's a joke. A shadow fell over his table. I hear you're looking for a way to get his attention. Vex looked up. Rico Vale. He looked thinner, his suit cheap and rumpled. He looked like a man who hadn't eaten a good meal in weeks. Humiliated, broke. What's it to you, Rico? I heard you got put on your ass by a girl. Vex taunted. Rico's face flushed. But he didn't take the bait. He was too desperate. I know her routines, the new job, the bus route she takes, the times. I know when she's alone. I know where she's alone. Vex leaned forward, his interest piqued. And what do you want for this? Rico said, his voice a raw whisper. I want in. With you. I want a piece of whatever you're planning, and I want to be there when you take her. Vex smiled. Sit down, Rico. Let's talk. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Vex listened, grunted, and hung up. He looked at Rico, his smile widening. It gets better, Vex said. That was a friend, a mutual friend, Lieutenant Calhan. He's got a job for us, too. Seems he wants to frame Luca for possession of contraband. He's even given us a blind spot to do the snatch, a place with no cops, no cameras, the old ferry docks. Vex's plan was simple. He would use Rico to get Maya. He would take her to the docks when Luca came, as they all knew he would. They would plant the contraband in Luca's car. Vex would get his turf war. Rico would get his revenge, and Calhan would get his arrest. It was a perfect three-pronged attack. Maya felt the change before she saw it. She was walking from the bus stop, a route she'd taken every day for 2 weeks. It was just after dusk. The streetlights were flickering on. But this time, the hair on her arms stood up. She slowed her pace. She looked at the reflections in the dark storefront windows. A man, walking 2 paces behind, too steady, too deliberate. She turned the corner. He turned the corner. She stopped at a newsstand to pretend to look at a magazine. He stopped, 30 feet back, to tie a shoe that was already tied. It was Rico. Her blood went ice cold, but the panic that rose was different now. It was cold, not hot. It was sharp. She was not the girl from the alley. She worked for Luca Marcelli. She had seen how he moved, how he thought. She kept walking, her pace steady. She passed her apartment building. She did not look back. She walked 2 more blocks to a small, brightly lit florist that was still open. She walked inside, the bell over the door chiming. I'll be right with you, a woman called from the back. Take your time, Maya called back. Her voice bright, cheerful. She moved to the back of the store, out of sight of the street, and pulled out her phone. She dialed. He answered on the first ring. Luca, she said, her voice perfectly steady, but low. Where are you? He knew. Instantly, from her tone. I'm at a florist, Bloom. On the corner of Mercer and 9th, Rico Vale is outside. He's been tailing me since the bus stop. Stay inside, thus he commanded. Stay on the line with me. Are the doors locked? It's open, the owner is in the back. Good, keep her there. Pretend to look at flowers. I'm 7 minutes out, my team is closer. He wasn't whispering, he was just giving orders. She could hear the roar of a powerful engine. She walked to the front, picked up a pot of orchids and pretended to study it. She could see Rico's reflection. He was across the street, pacing, frustrated, looking at his watch. He was waiting for her to come out. He's still there, she murmured. He's getting agitated. He can wait, Luca said, his voice a low growl. I'm 2 minutes. As if by magic, 2 black sedans, not the Lincoln, turned onto the street. They didn't speed. They didn't use their sirens. They simply arrived. They parked, one on either side of the florist. Blocking the street, 2 men got out of each car. They didn't look at Rico. They just stood on the sidewalk, watching the doors. Rico saw them. He saw the suits, the earpieces. He saw the trap close. His face went pale. He started to walk away, quickly. He's running, Maya said. He won't get far. Luca said, just then, the Lincoln turned the corner. Luca was in the passenger seat. He was already out of the car before it stopped. He walked into the florist, the bell chiming. His eyes found her. He didn't come to her. Not at first. He walked to the front window, looked out, and spoke into his sleeve. Got him. Bag him. Then he turned to her. He walked over, his face a mask of controlled fury, and he stopped, just in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his eyes scanning her, checking for injuries. "You're okay," he said. It was a statement. "I'm okay," she confirmed. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "He's a civilian problem, Maya. We have him. My men can handle him, or—" He gestured to the street, where one of his men was now courteously holding a confused Rico by the arm. "We can call the police. The real police. And you can press charges, stalking, harassment." This was it. The choice. His way or her way. "I want to press charges," she said, her voice clear. "I want it on the record. I'm not a victim. I'm a witness." He nodded, a look of profound, dark pride in his eyes. He pulled out his phone. "Bianchi, get Detective Hart. Tell her we have a present for her." They filed the report at the precinct, not the one Calhan ran, but a downtown office. Detective Nyla Hart was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Maya's story, took her statement, and looked at Luca, who had sat in the corner, silent for the entire hour. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Marcelli," Hart said, closing her notepad. "I'm just giving Miss Rios a ride," he said, his voice smooth. "Uh-huh." Hart looked at Maya. "You're playing in a dangerous league. Kid, this report." She tapped the paper. "It's good. It puts Vale in the system, ties him to you. But it also paints a target. You be careful." "I am," Maya said. They left the precinct just after midnight. They were both drained, the adrenaline of the night crashing hard. The ride to her apartment was silent. He walked her to her door. The hallway, with its flickering light and peeling paint, felt too small for him. She fumbled with her keys. The silence was heavy, charged with everything that had happened. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, the words surprising her. I can make tea." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Yes," he said. Her apartment was tiny, but it was clean, and it was hers. He looked impossibly large in the small space, his suit jacket draped over the back of her only chair. She made tea, her hands still shaking slightly. They sat on the couch, inches apart, holding the warm mugs. "You were good tonight," he said, his voice quiet. "You didn't panic. You were smart. I was terrified," she confessed, "but I was also angry. He thought I was still the same girl he pushed in the alley. He was wrong." "Yes," he said. He was. He set his mug down on the floor. He turned to her. He didn't move, just looked at her. The silence was back, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the kiss in the warehouse, the fear in the florist, the exhaustion in the precinct. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the couch cushion. His palm was warm, his skin rough against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt as final as a contract. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. He leaned in, and she met him. The kiss was nothing like the first one. There was no hesitation. It was slow and deep and full of a desperate, aching need. His breath mingled with hers. She could taste the tea and something else, something that was just him. His other hand came up, cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. She leaned into his touch, a small, involuntary sound escaping her throat. This was what she had been fighting. This was what she had been wanting. The heat built, a slow, insistent burn. The kiss became more urgent. His hand slid from her cheek to her neck, his fingers tangling in the hair at her nape, tilting her head. She pressed closer, her free hand coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart, a strong, steady beat beneath her palm, hammering in time with her own. He pulled back. His breath was ragged, his eyes were dark, his pupils blown wide. He was looking at her, not as a boss, not as a protector, but as a man holding on by a thread. "Maya," he said, his voice thick, "is this what you want?" His honesty, his restraint, was a more powerful aphrodisiac than any cheap move. He was giving her the out. He was giving her the choice, even now, when she knew he was burning. Her answer was clear. It was in the way she held his gaze. It was in the way her thumb stroked the lapel of his shirt. "Yes," she whispered, "but—" He nodded, already knowing. He closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. "The danger," he said. "The danger," she agreed. This is too much, with everything else." He didn't argue. He didn't push. He let out a long, shuddering breath and pulled her against him, not in a passionate embrace, but in a hold. He wrapped his arms around her, and she buried her face in his neck, her own arms circling his waist. They just sat there, fully clothed, on her small, worn-out couch, holding each other. Her heart was racing against his ribs. His heart was racing against hers. It was an agony of restraint. But in that moment, in that shared, impossible, adult choice, something was sealed between them. They would wait. As they sat there, Luca's accountant, Bianchi, was in his office, staring at a spreadsheet. He had finally untangled the web Anne Cushing had found. He traced the shell route of Maya's debt, and he found the final link. The investment firm that had bought the debt and was profiting from the harassment. It was registered to Calhan's brother. Bianchi picked up the phone. Luca, his arms still around Maya. Let it ring. Bianchi hung up and started recording his findings for the investigators Luca had quietly put on retainer. Luca was contemplating a move that could cost him his throne. He was going to use the law, not the gun, to take down a cop. It was a declaration of war against the old ways. Vex Moreno didn't wait. When he heard Rico Vale had been arrested, and worse, had been processed by Nyla Hart, he knew his plan was blown. Calhan was furious. The frame-up was dead. Vex retaliated, in the only way he knew how, blindly, angrily. That night, a Marcelli warehouse, a real one, holding legitimate shipping goods, was torched. The fire lit up the night sky over the docks. Luca's captains were screaming for blood. They wanted Vex's head. They demanded a war. Luca refused, and he didn't hit back. He didn't send his men into the North Pier. Instead, he doubled the protection on his community sites. He put guards on the foundation, on the community center, on the blocks where the families lived. He was signaling a different kind of power. He wasn't protecting his product. He was protecting his people. It was a move that baffled the old guard and solidified his new world control. 2 days later, in the rare, quiet morning, Maya woke up in a place she didn't recognize. After the fire, Luca had moved her. "Just for a few days," he'd said, "until I know you're not the next target." It was a safe house, a sterile, high-end apartment with bulletproof windows and a stunning view of the city. He had stayed, sleeping on the couch. She padded into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of coffee. He was there, in gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy, his feet bare. He was cooking. He was making scrambled eggs. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "This is weird," she said, pulling a blanket tighter around her. "It is," he agreed. He smiled, that slow, rare smile that lit his entire face. "Coffee," she nodded. He poured her a mug. They stood in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, stealing kisses between sips of coffee. It was so normal, so domestic. It was a glimpse of a life they could never have. "The eggs are burning," she murmured, her lips brushing his. "I know," he said, his arm sliding around her waist, pulling her close. He was about to kiss her again, deeply, when a high-pitched electronic whir sounded from outside the window. Maya's blood ran cold. Luca's entire body went rigid. He let her go, moving to the window, his movements fast and precise. He looked down, then up. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but his face was grim. High above the street, hovering at their window, a small, black drone camera whirred. Its red light was on. Someone was watching. They had found them. The illusion of safety shattered at 5:17 in the evening. Maya was at her desk at the foundation, logging out the last of the day's pantry visitors. It was closing time. The 2 Marcelli guards at the front door, a new and constant presence, were watching the street. "All set, Miss Rios." One of them, a broad man named Pally, said, "We'll walk you to the car." The car, another nondescript sedan, was waiting to take her to the safe house. She was gathering her coat when the world exploded in a screech of tires and the percussive, shattering crunch of metal on metal. "What the hell?" Pally yelled. Outside, on the street, a staged car crash. A flatbed truck had T-boned a city bus. It was chaos. People were screaming. The two guards did exactly what they were trained to do, and exactly what the attackers had counted on. They ran outside to secure the perimeter, their attention drawn to the larger, more obvious threat. Stay inside. Miss Rios, lock the door. Pally shouted over his shoulder. Maya ran to the door, fumbling for the deadbolt, before her fingers could find it. The door was shoved open, slamming her back against the wall. Two men, not from the accident, wearing dark hoodies and ski masks, filled the doorway. It was not Vex. It was not Rico. These were his crew. She opened her mouth to scream, but a rough, gloved hand clamped over her face, the material tasting of leather and sweat. She was lifted off her feet. She kicked hard, connecting with a shin, and was rewarded with a grunt and a brutal shove. "Get her in the van," a voice barked. She was dragged out the front door, past the screaming onlookers who were all filming the bus crash. No one even saw her. She was just another piece of the chaos. Her hands were yanked behind her back, the plastic bite of a zip tie cutting into her wrists. Tight, too tight. Another tie went around her ankles. A strip of foul-smelling duct tape was slapped over her mouth, and a black bag, smelling of burlap and oil, was shoved over her head. She was thrown, not placed, into the back of a van. The door slammed, plunging her into a terrifying, rattling darkness. The vehicle peeled out, its tires squealing, leaving the staged crash, the foundation, and the two distracted guards far behind. Luca was in his office, on the phone with his lawyer, when his private phone chimed, a text from an unknown number. He ignored it. It chimed again, and again, a rapid, insistent series of pings. He muted his lawyer. "What is it?" he snapped. "Sir," Bianchi said, his face pale. "The guards at the foundation just called in. There was a crash. They were distracted. She's gone." The blood left Luca's face. He hung up on the lawyer and opened the text. It was a video file. He clicked play. The image was grainy, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a chain. Maya. She was bound to a metal chair. The bag was off her head, but the tape was still on her mouth, her dark hair wild, her eyes wide with a defiant terror. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. Vex Moreno stepped into the frame, his face a caricature of a smile. He held a phone to his ear, as if he were talking. "Hey, boss," Vex sneered into the camera. "Nice place you got. I'm just calling to talk about a transfer, a little turf, the North Pier, all of it, and, let's say, 500,000 in cash, for my trouble." He walked over to Maya, stroked a finger down her cheek. Her entire body flinched, a violent recoil. Luca's hand tightened on his phone so hard the screen protector cracked. "You've got 2 hours, Luca," Vex said, his voice dropping. 2 hours to get me my money. And if I see a single cop, if I even smell a uniform, I'll just disappear her. The river's deep, you know? Nobody ever finds what goes in." The video ended. The silence in Luca's office was absolute. Bianchi and 2 of his senior captains, who had been in the meeting, watched him. They were waiting for the order. They were waiting for him to unleash the dogs, to call his men, to start a war that would burn the city to the ground. Luca stood up. He walked to the window, his back to them, and looked down at the city. He was not breathing. "Bianchi," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Get me Detective Hart, now." Bianchi stared. "Boss? Nyla Hart?" "Did I stutter?" Luca turned, his eyes not angry, but cold, glacial. "And get me the number for the federal liaison she works with on the Organized Crime Task Force, the one she thinks I don't know about. Luca, what are you doing?" Sal, one of the old guard captains, stepped forward. "This is family business. You don't call the cops. He took what's ours. We hit back. We take his head. That is the code." "The code is broken," Luca said, turning back to the window. "The code got my father killed. The code is what let Calhan and his rats build a nest in our city. The code is what put her in that chair." He picked up his personal phone and dialed. "Detective Hart," he said, his voice all business. "I have a situation, and I have a gift. You want Vex Moreno? You want Lieutenant Calhan? You want the whole predatory racket from the shell companies to the badge? I'm going to give them to you. All of them, but in return, I need a coordinated rescue, and I need protection for every civilian in that dockyard." He listened. "Yes, she's there. The old ferry docks, Pier 4. He's holding her there. He gave me 2 hours. That gives us about 90 minutes. I'm sending you the ledgers. All of them, Calhan. The shell firms, my father's old rackets, everything. You have my full cooperation, but you do this my way, or I hang up, and I will burn this city down to find her. Am I clear?" He hung up and looked at his men. "We're not starting a blood feud. We are finishing one. We are ending this. Tonight." The preparation was tense. Luca's men, a dozen of them, gathered in a disused mechanics garage. They were armed, but Luca's orders were chillingly specific. "Minimal force," he said, standing over a map of the docks. "This is not a firefight. We are not the cowboys. We are backup. Nyla Hart's team is primary. They go in from the river, fast and loud. Our job," he pointed to the single access road, "is containment. We set up 2 vans, here and here. No one gets out, Vex's crew, Calhan's lackeys. They are trapped. But you do not, I repeat, do not use lethal force unless your life is in immediate danger. This is not about macho rituals. This is about Maya's life. This is about Raventon's future." Sal spat on the concrete floor. "This is weakness. You're inviting the feds into our house. You're letting a woman tell you how to be a boss." Luca walked up to him, his 5'11" frame seeming to tower over the larger man. His voice was a whisper. "And you're letting your ego cost this city its soul. She is not a prize, Sal. She is a person. And her life matters more than your pride. You follow my order, or you can walk out that door and never come back." Sal held his gaze, and then, for the first time, the old guard captain looked away. Maya was in the dark. The chair was cold. She could hear the river lapping against the pilings outside the warehouse, the metallic creak of the old building. Vex and his men were in the next room, drinking, laughing, waiting. She was terrified. But beneath the terror was the ice, the cold, sharp anger that had saved her from Rico. She was not a victim. She was a witness. She was alive. She tested the zip ties. They were brutally tight, cutting into her wrists. The tape was still over her mouth. She breathed through her nose, deep, steady breaths. "Breathe with me." She heard his voice in her head. She focused. She remembered her jacket, the one she was still wearing, the cheap zipper. She'd felt it when they'd tied her. It was broken, one tooth sticking out at a sharp, metallic angle. She shifted in the chair. It was a minuscule movement. She worked her hands, still bound behind her, trying to reach the zipper pull. Her shoulders screamed. She twisted, her back aching, until her fingers brushed the metal. She began to saw. She angled the sharp, broken tooth against the edge of the plastic zip tie. It was a slow, agonizing process, a tiny, repetitive, desperate movement. Saw, saw, saw. The plastic was thick. She didn't know if it would work. She felt a hot, wet sting. She had cut her own wrist on the tooth. Blood, warm and slick, ran down her hand. She didn't stop. The blood lubricated the plastic. Saw, saw, saw. She felt it. A pop. Not a break, but the plastic had thinned. The loop was loose. She hadn't cut all the way through, but she had created slack. Enough. She pulled her wrist back into the tight, original position, the blood making her skin slick against the plastic. She sat perfectly still. She was ready to bolt. The docks were cold. The wind off the river was sharp. Vex had dragged Maya's chair out into the open, onto the rotting pier, as a show of good faith. A single light illuminated them. "He's late," Vex snapped, checking his watch. "I'm here," Luca's voice. He was walking out of the darkness, onto the pier. He was alone. He wore a suit, no jacket, just the vest and shirt. His hands were open, at his sides. He was unarmed. Vex laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "Just you, boss. No army. I'm disappointed." Luca didn't look at Vex. His eyes found Maya. He was 20 yards away, but his gaze was a physical thing, a lifeline. He saw the tape, the fear in her eyes, the way she was holding herself. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just looked. "I'm here. Breathe with me." She saw him. And her terror, The wild, heart-pounding panic receded. She took a breath through her nose. She was not alone. Then, and only then, did Luca turn his attention to Vex. "You wanted to talk terms. Let's talk." "The terms are simple," Vex sneered. "The cash, the territory." "The territory is a mess," Luca said, walking closer, slowly, his hands still open. "The shipping lanes are a disaster. You have no idea the headache you're inheriting." He was stalling. He was walking. He was closing the distance. From the river, a sound, not a boat engine, a whisper. "What was that?" Vex asked, looking over his shoulder. In that instant, Nyla Hart's tactical unit, in a black, silent-running inflatable, hit the pier. "Police! Get down! Hands in the air!" Simultaneously, two large, black vans, the kind used by electricians, slammed into the chain-link gate at the street, blocking the only exit. Luca's men. The world erupted. Flashbang grenades detonated, bright, blinding flashes of light and concussive sound. Vex's men, disoriented, started firing blindly. Maya didn't wait. The second the first flash went off, she ran. She ripped her right hand free of the loosened zip tie, the plastic tearing her skin. But she was free. She ducked her head and ran, not toward Luca, but toward the darkest part of the pier. A shot rang out, aimed at her. "Maya!" Luca was there. He wasn't running toward Vex. He wasn't running toward his men. He was running toward her. He tackled her, but not a tackle. He covered her, his arms wrapping around her, his entire body becoming a shield, and they went down, skidding on the wet wood, ending up behind a stack of rusted pilings. He hadn't fired a shot. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a roar. The chaos was suddenly organized. Neela's team was efficient, moving, shouting commands. Luca's men, in the dark, were a silent, containing force. A single cruiser, its lights and sirens screaming, tore down the access road, slamming on its brakes. Calhan, he jumped out, his gun drawn. "What the hell is this? Who authorized this raid? Hart, is that you?" Nyla Hart, calm as ever, walked out of the shadows, her weapon lowered. "Good evening, Lieutenant, You have no jurisdiction." "Oh, but I do," Nyla said, her voice carrying. "Lieutenant Calhan, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and affiliation with a known criminal enterprise." "This is insane! You're on camera! Hart, you're all on camera!" he shrieked, tapping his own body cam. "I know," Nyla smiled. "We're counting on it. Tell us all about your brother's investment firm." Calhan's face, illuminated by the flashing lights, crumpled. He began to rant, a wild, bribe-laced, threatening tirade. All of it, every self-incriminating word, captured for the record. Vex Moreno, seeing it was over, seeing Calhan cuffed, made a last desperate lunge for a fleeing angle, trying to dive into the black water. Luca, his hand on Maya's head, holding her down, saw the movement. He left her. Just for a second, he moved faster than she had ever seen him move. He didn't draw a gun. He tackled Vex, a clean, brutal, textbook takedown. Vex's head hit the wood with a thunk. Luca was on top of him, pulling his arms behind his back, restraining him, but not killing him. He was cuffing him with another zip tie. It was over. The sirens, the real ones, were fading in. Maya was pressed against the piling, shaking so violently she couldn't feel her legs. Luca was there, his jacket gone, his suit vest and shirt stained with grime. He knelt in front of her. His hands, those scarred, strong hands, were trembling. He didn't speak. He just took off his suit jacket, which he'd apparently been holding, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm. It smelled of him. "Maya," he said, his voice raw. He touched her face, his thumb wiping at the bloody smear from where she'd torn the tape from her mouth. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" She just shook her head, unable to speak, her teeth chattering. The cameras arrived. The local news, drawn by the fire and the police scanners, swarmed the pier. They descended on the scene, a mass of flashing lights, microphones, and shouted questions. They surrounded Luca, who was still kneeling, his back to them, shielding Maya. Mr. Marcelli, was this a turf war? Was this Vex Moreno? What happened here?" Luca stood. Slowly, he turned, his body blocking the cameras from Maya. He was disheveled, bloody, and exhausted. He looked, for all the world, like a defeated man, but his eyes were on fire. He stared, not at the reporters, but directly into the lens of the lead camera. His voice was quiet, but it carried, silencing the chaotic scrum. "My name is Luca Marcelli," he said, "and I am cooperating fully with Detective Nyla Hart and federal law enforcement. Tonight, we have begun the work of ending the predatory pipeline that targeted this woman and hundreds of others. This isn't a turf war. This," he said, his voice dropping, "is a cleanup." Raventon reeled. The city, which had braced for a bloody, predictable turf war, was left gasping for air, confused by what it had witnessed. The monster, Luca Marcelli, had not behaved like a monster. He had not executed his rival on the pier. He had, instead, handed him, a corrupt cop, and a mountain of incriminating evidence over to the authorities. The news cycle exploded. Pundits on late-night panels were baffled. Some called it a brilliant strategic pivot, a new mafia emerging, using the law as a weapon. Others, in the lifestyle columns, called it romance, painting Luca as a dark prince. His every action dictated by a desperate love for a South Raventon barista. Maya's name trended for 48 hours. Her face, grainy stills from the cafe vandalism, was everywhere. Debates raged online and in coffee shops about protection versus paternalism. Had Luca saved her, or had he, by his very presence, endangered her? Was she a damsel in distress, or was he a controlling force that had co-opted her life? In a sunlit, private hospital room 2 days later, none of it mattered. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her wrists bandaged where the zip ties had torn the skin. She had been cleared of any serious injury, but they were holding her for observation, mostly to keep her away from the media circus. Detective Nyla Hart sat opposite her, her notepad open. "We have enough to put Vex Moreno away for a very long time. Maya, attempted kidnapping, assault, conspiracy. Your testimony, combined with Rico Vale's, is the final nail." Maya just nodded, her gaze distant, in the corner, by the door. Luca stood. He had been there for 3 hours, a silent, watchful shadow in a dark suit. He hadn't approached. He hadn't interrupted Nyla's debrief. He just stood, his hands clasped in front of him, keeping his distance. He was giving her the room, the space she had always demanded. Nyla closed her notepad. "You did good, kid. You're a hell of a witness." She stood, nodded curtly at Luca, "Mr. Marcelli," and left the room, the door clicking softly shut behind her. The silence that filled the room was heavy, thick with everything unsaid. Luca didn't move. He was waiting. Maya looked at her bandaged hands, resting in her lap. Then slowly, she looked at him. He met her gaze, his eyes tired, but steady. She didn't say anything. Instead, she lifted her right hand, the one that was less injured. It was a small, quiet gesture, an offering, an invitation. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't grab her hand. He knelt, just as he had in the cafe, so his eyes were level with hers. He looked at her outstretched hand and then at her face. She reached out the last few inches. He met her, his large, warm hand covering hers. She didn't stop. She threaded her fingers through his, lacing them together. Her small, bandaged hand held firmly in his scarred, strong one. It was a small, decisive act. It was an answer. While she was healing, the city was being rebuilt. Legally. Anne Cushing, the attorney, used Luca's ledgers and Nyla Hart's arrests to full effect. She secured a sweeping court order, a class-action victory, that voided not just Maya's debt, but over 200 other predatory contracts tied to Calhan's ring. The shell companies were frozen, their assets seized, the restitution funds, millions of dollars bled from the community, were not returned to the syndicate. At Luca's public insistence, the money was used to seed the Marcelli Community Foundation's new Raventon Relief Program, a fund dedicated to victim advocacy and debt relief. And, in a move that stunned the city, the program was not run by his men, but by a board of community overseers, including Mrs. DeMarco from the bread line, the pantry manager, and, when she was ready, Maya Rios, It was 2 weeks later. Maya was back in her own apartment. The locks had been changed. The 30-day notice was a bad memory. She was playing soft music, something with a quiet piano. The warm lamplight made the small space feel like a sanctuary. The knock on her door was soft. She opened it. Luca. He looked. Normal. No suit. Just dark jeans and a Henley that stretched across his shoulders. He was holding a bag of takeout. "I was nearby," he said. A poor excuse. "You're never just nearby," she replied, but she smiled, stepping aside to let him in. They ate, sitting on her couch, the conversation easy, skirting the edges of the trauma they had shared. They talked about the foundation, about a new shipment of coats, about the weather. When they were done, she took the containers to the kitchen. He followed, standing in the doorway, watching her. "You don't have to hover, Luca," she said, her back to him. "I'm not hovering," he said, his voice low. "I'm waiting." She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. He was close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth from his body. "This is my apartment," she said, her voice a near whisper. "My space." "I know." He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his gaze asking the question, the same one he had asked before. "Is this what you want?" She dropped the towel, and she was the one who closed the gap. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart. "Yes," she murmured, answering the unspoken question. That was all the consent he needed. He was so careful, so tender. It almost broke her heart. His hands came up, framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He leaned in, and the kiss was not a desperate, frantic thing. It was not the kiss of adrenaline and fear. It was a kiss of arrival, a slow, deep, profound kiss that spoke of sleepless nights and a relief so total it was staggering. It was a shared, slow exhale. His lips moved from her mouth to her jaw, her temple, his breath warm. "Maya," he breathed, his voice rough, as if her name was the only thing he knew. His hands were reverent. They were not the hands of a boss taking what he wanted. They were the hands of a man terrified of breaking something precious. They traced the line of her forearm, his fingers brushing the new, healing skin near her bandages. His hands moved to her shoulders, kneading the tension that was always there. They slid down to her back, holding her, pressing her close. She melted against him, her own hands sliding up from his chest to circle his neck. They stood there, in the middle of her kitchen, in the warm lamplight, simply holding each other, their bodies aligned, their hearts beating in time. Clothes remained tasteful, the lines unblurred. The emphasis was not on an act, but on the overwhelming closeness. It was about the eye contact, the shared breath, and the profound, undeniable relief of surviving. Together, for Luca. The political battle was just beginning. The syndicate was in an uproar. Sal and the old guard were furious. He had brought the law into their business. He had given up their ledgers. He called a meeting, not in a warehouse, but in a clean, rented conference room. "The old way is done," he told them, his voice flat, no room for negotiation. "The predatory rackets, the drugs, the back alley payoffs, it's over. It's a dying business, and it will get us all either killed or imprisoned." "What's the new way, boss?" Sal sneered. "Bake sales?" Luca pointed to the whiteboard. "Security? Legit? Bonded security for the new construction downtown. Shipping compliance. Half the companies on the pier are failing federal inspections. We will make them pass. Construction apprenticeships. We have the labor. The city needs the buildings." He looked at the 10 men in the room. "This is the new way. It's harder, it's slower, it's less profit. For now. But it lasts. I am offering you a choice. Adapt and build something real with me. Or walk. Take your buyout and retire. But if you walk, you are out. And if you cross me, if you try to keep the old rackets, I will use the same tools I used on Calhan. On you." It was a revolution. That day, several captains left. They took the buyouts, muttering about weakness, about his father, but enough stayed. Enough were tired of looking over their shoulders. Enough were smart enough to see that the city was, in fact, changing. The Marcelli syndicate began its painful, slow pivot toward legitimacy. The trials were swift. Rico Vale, facing his own long list of charges, flipped to save himself. He testified against Vex, and he laid bare the entire workings of the shell firms. Maya was there, in the gallery, when he took the stand, and he wouldn't look at her. She watched him, his cheap suit, his sweaty brow, his voice weak as he answered the prosecutor's questions. She felt nothing, not fear, not anger, only a quiet, cold finality. Her chin was lifted. She was no longer afraid of his voice or his hands. At a community forum a month later, held in the high school gymnasium, Luca sat in the front row. He was there to publicly support the city council's new task force on predatory lending. He was just another concerned businessman. The final speaker of the night was a surprise, added to the list by Nyla Hart. It was Maya. She walked to the podium, her voice shaking in only for a moment. She spoke about her mother. She spoke about the debt, and then she looked out, at the crowd, at the cameras, and at the man in the front row. "We need protection," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We deserve to be safe in our homes and on our streets. But we must demand a new kind of safety. We must be clear. Here," her eyes found Luca's. "Protection is not possession." The gym was silent. Luca held her gaze, and then, slowly, deliberately, he nodded once. He was meeting her where she stood, in the light, in public. The fallout settled. Vex Moreno was sentenced to 25 years to life. Calhan lost his badge, his pension, and was facing a long, complex federal trial. Mr. Henderson from the cafe sent Maya a letter, a rambling, tear-stained apology, offering her job back, with a raise and full medical benefits. She smiled, folded the letter, and stayed at the foundation. She was building programs she wished had existed when her mother got sick. She was in charge. One evening, at dusk, they were walking, the river walk. The air was crisp, the smell of autumn replacing the rot of the summer. The city lights trembled on the dark water. Maya leaned her head on his shoulder as they walked. "You know," she teased, her voice light, "I think about that first night. In the alley." "I try not to," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You listened," she said, looking up at him. "When I told you, 'Touch me again and I'll end you.' I was terrified, and I was bluffing, and you were a mafia boss, and you just backed up. You listened." He smiled, that rare, slow smile that was only for her. "You were very convincing." A strand of her hair blew across her face. He lifted his hand, but stopped, his scarred knuckles inches from her cheek. She met his gaze, and she leaned in, just a fraction, closing the distance, inviting the touch. Only then did he gently, carefully, brush the hair behind her ear, his fingers warm against her skin. Their bodies were aligned, a perfect, comfortable fit. They chose a difficult adult future. It was a love bound not by ownership, but by consent and autonomy. They were building a safer Raventon. One choice, one day at a time, through stubborn, unglamorous courage. In the distance, a siren wailed, a high, lonely sound cutting through the night. The old world, the old dangers, were still there. But Maya didn't flinch, and Luca didn't reach for a weapon. They just stood together, hands laced, ready to protect what they were making, without losing who they were. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so grateful to have you here. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please comment below and let us know. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. We cannot wait to share our next story with you. Please share your thoughts with us in English.